Queen Victoria ruled over lands so vast that people joked the sun never bothered to set on her empire. Yet, inside her private world, she was just one woman, with 9 young lives circling around her like planets around a blazing sun. Every royal portrait, every shining crown, every parade crowd cheering her name hid a quieter truth. Victoria was as anxious as she was powerful, trying to shape a perfect family while the world watched every move. It still feels astonishing that all 9 of her children survived to adulthood. In an age when disease could take a baby overnight, this was almost unheard of. It made the royal nursery feel like an experiment in dynastic power. Each child wasn't only a beloved son or daughter. They were a carefully positioned piece in a continental puzzle. Victoria could influence parliaments only through soft persuasion, but she could influence Europe by placing her children in palaces across the map. Germany, Russia, Greece, Romania, Spain, Sweden. All these countries would eventually host at least one child or grandchild of hers. Crown princes and princesses, dukes and duchesses, all sharing her blood and name. Many of them married because politics required it, not because love felt right. Duty, not desire, would determine their future. That's how she became known as the Grandmother of Europe. It sounds affectionate, like she knitted socks for half a continent. But in truth, it speaks to strategy. Victoria's matchmaking came with a long shadow. Those alliances, those shared bloodlines, became threads tying families together, and sometimes pulling them into conflict. World War I would one day pit several of her own grandchildren against each other, cousins commanding armies on opposite sides of a war that set the world on fire. But for now, imagine the beginning. A royal nursery filled with the noise of 9 little personalities, a lineup of tutors, nurses with crisp caps, footmen bustling in polished boots. Prince Albert, Victoria's devoted husband, brought German discipline into the household, determined to shape model royals who could inspire nations. Victoria admired his structure, admired his intelligence, admired him so completely that his views became the foundation of her parenting. There were portraits to sit for before they could even write their own names. There were languages to learn, good posture to maintain, manners to perfect. Cameras had arrived by then, so photographs froze their growing faces in crisp black and white, perfect ringlets, perfect boots, perfect smiles. The world saw royalty. Inside, they were just children trying to understand why perfection mattered so much. Victoria was thrilled when her first child, a daughter named Victoria, nicknamed Vicky, proved brilliant, a prodigy who spoke multiple languages by the time most children simply mastered the alphabet. But relief turned into frustration with her eldest son, Bertie, the boy destined to be king one day. He struggled in classrooms that came easily to his sister. Victoria worried endlessly about the monarchy, about discipline, about the future. She praised one child and scolded another, trying to secure a legacy far larger than herself. She believed a mother could shape history, and in many ways, she did. There was love in her home, yes, her letters are full of affectionate words, but love often bowed beneath her grief and fear. When Prince Albert died far too young, sadness swallowed the palace. Victoria dressed in black and barely smiled again. Her sorrow was so large that her children had to step around it like a grand piece of furniture crowding every room. Mourning became part of the household routine, a reminder that happiness was fragile and duty was not. Even toy rooms carried rules. Play was permitted, but never loud. Joy was welcomed, but only if it behaved itself. One day those children would be princesses and princes of nations. Their mother insisted they learn the weight of that responsibility early. Each child absorbed that pressure differently. One channeled brilliance into hope for a more peaceful Germany. One rebelled with glamorous scandals before finally becoming king. One comforted the sick only to lose everything to disease. One sailed the world and returned home with heartbreak hidden behind medals. One stayed at her mother's side until she became more caretaker than daughter. One bent rules with art and independence, shocking polite society. One signed military papers and saluted through 2 world wars. One bled with every stumble, intelligent and fragile at the same time. And one, the youngest, sacrificed love and freedom to be the Queen's constant companion. They entered life in a nursery warmed by royal privilege, but they grew into adults who would navigate wars, revolution, genetic illness, personal loss, and the changing shape of the world. That is the story ahead of us. 9 lives shaped not only by affection, but by a mother's relentless fear of losing control. 9 hearts learning to live inside an empire's expectations. 9 voices eventually scattered across Europe's grandest palaces, carrying both prestige and problems with them. As we move forward, let's take our time. There's no hurry here. The world outside their windows moved quickly. Factories rising, railways stretching, armies drilling, politics shifting. But our story will move gently, like turning pages in a quiet room. We will watch these royal children grow up one after another, noticing the tiniest moments that steer them toward marriages chosen for strategic advantage, toward illnesses that no doctor could fix, toward political storms that would change the world forever. Tonight, we simply stand at the doorway of Victoria's home. A home filled with strict rules, shining ambition, and the soft footsteps of children destined to shake Europe's foundations. Let's sit with them for a moment longer. 9 small figures under the watchful gaze of a mother who loved them fiercely, worried endlessly, and controlled them completely. Their journey begins here, in the glow of nursery lamps, long before crowns and wars and secrets transformed them into names history will never forget. When you're ready, we will quietly walk into their childhood room and watch the first child step forward from the shadow of the throne. Inside the royal nursery, expectations, experiments, and early wounds, cribs, corsets, and expectations, childhood in Queen Victoria's palace. The royal nursery sounds like it should be a place of pure softness, toys on the floor, storybooks, the easy laughter of 9 little siblings. In Queen Victoria's world, it was softer than council chambers and parliaments, but it was still a training ground. From almost the moment they could stand, her children were not just little people. They were future faces of the British royal family, the living core of the Queen Victoria family tree. Picture the scene calmly. A long corridor inside a palace. Behind one particular door, a row of cribs and small beds, each with its own occupant. German nannies speaking in gentle accents, a governess with a firm sense of order, toys carefully arranged, not scattered, lessons waiting in the next room. This is where Queen Victoria children first learned that their days were not entirely their own. Prince Albert put a great deal of thought into this nursery. He wanted his sons and daughters to be clever, disciplined, and morally steady. He brought in tutors who could teach not just reading and writing, but also music, languages, and useful skills for future queens, princesses, kings, and dukes. German-style structure ran through the routine. Regular hours, punctual meals, planned walks, carefully supervised play. While other families in Britain adjusted to factories and city life, this royal household adjusted to timetables and expectations. There was affection, but even affection had rules. Children were encouraged to show respect, self-control, and modesty. Tantrums were not treated as normal childhood storms. They were hints of future danger. If a prince might one day be king, then a temper looked like a threat to the stability of a constitutional monarchy. If a princess might marry into another royal family, then clumsiness or laziness looked like a flaw in the grand project of royal matchmaking in Europe. So small hands were guided, small shoulders straightened, small mistakes noted. Within this environment, 9 personalities gradually emerged. One child listened closely and absorbed every lesson like a sponge, eager to please, quick to speak foreign languages. Another fidgeted, struggled with rigid lessons, and found life outside the classroom more interesting than any book. One had a quiet gift for comforting others. One seemed to carry sunshine into a room. One preferred drawing boards and sculpting tools to etiquette manuals. One's body betrayed him with an X-linked bleeding disorder, and one became almost fused to her mother's side. Victoria saw them not just as individuals, but as a group she had to direct. Without using modern words for it, she treated the family a bit like a system. Someone had to be the brilliant one. Someone ended up seen as the troublemaker. Someone became the steady helper. Someone took on the role of emotional support. Roles formed early and were hard to escape. In that structured nursery, you can imagine how a label might stick. If you're praised constantly for being clever, it becomes frightening to fail. If you're always told you're difficult, it becomes tempting to lean into mischief. If you are the one who calms arguments, you start listening more than speaking. These subtle assignments shaped Queen Victoria's parenting, and they shaped Victorian parenting more generally among the upper classes. Children were almost cast into parts and then expected to perform them. It wasn't only parents watching. Servants observed, courtiers noticed, visitors commented on the promising eldest daughter or the wayward little prince. The nursery and schoolroom were not completely private spaces. They were miniature theaters where future rulers were rehearsing their public selves. On top of that came the world outside the palace walls. Newspapers and magazines were developing a taste for royal stories. Early photography meant that the royal children could now appear in images distributed to the public. A picture of Victoria and Prince Albert children together signaled stability and continuity. The Queen Victoria, 9 children, became living proof that the monarchy was strong and fertile, a comforting image for a society rushing through industrialization and change. Still, the same images that reassured the public also added pressure. When you are a child and you see your own face printed, carefully posed, you learn very quickly that you are being watched. You have become part of British royal family history documentary material before you really understand what that means. Then came the emotional blow that would quietly shape all of their early years: the loss of Prince Albert. One day, he was the steady presence setting their schedules, correcting their posture, explaining duty and honor. Soon after, he was gone. The palace, once strict but relatively balanced, shifted into something heavier. Queen Victoria's grief washed through every room. Black gowns, drawn curtains, and lowered voices turned the palaces into places of constant remembrance. This is where Victorian mourning culture and Victorian motherhood meet. A mother who cannot set aside her own heartbreak, and children who now grow up in an atmosphere where sadness is almost a household member. The Queen Victoria children felt that change not just through their mother's tears, but through her increased dependence and control. The nursery became quieter. Laughter was still allowed, but it felt slightly risky, as if joy might be disrespectful to the memory of the man who had set all the rules. Some children tried harder than ever to be good, hoping to ease their mother's pain. Others sensed that no amount of obedience would really lift the weight from her shoulders. In these early years, the groundwork was laid for everything that would follow: the strict sense of public duty, the tendency to choose royal succession and primogeniture above personal happiness, the habit of using marriage to build networks of European royal genealogy Victoria could be proud of. The royal children watched their mother withdraw from society and yet still exert enormous influence through letters, matches, and that famous phrase, "Grandmother of Europe." Inside that nursery, they could not yet see World War I, or the Romanov tragedy, royal ties, or the Spanish Bourbons and hemophilia, or the end of absolute monarchy in Europe. But the ingredients were already there: a powerful mother with strong ideas about honor and respectability, a group of heirs and daughters raised under constant scrutiny, and a family style that blended love, fear, and ambition. They learned to stand straight when they were tired. They learned to greet important visitors politely. They learned to hide pain. They learned that their lives were not fully their own. And slowly, they began to grow into the roles history would later assign them: brilliant reformer, black sheep, nurse, sailor prince, quiet backbone, artist, soldier, fragile genius, and keeper of secrets. For now, they are still children, walking the nursery corridors in small boots, glancing up whenever their mother enters the room, sensing the importance of her approval. Soon, though, those doors will open wider. They will step out of the nursery and into courts in Berlin, Darmstadt, Coburg, Ottawa, Bucharest, Petrograd, Madrid, carrying all the training, wounds, and quiet longings they first formed under that high, watchful ceiling. When you're ready, we'll let the first of them step forward and follow her from this carefully ordered room into a new country and a new royal court. Vicky. The Experiment in Liberal Monarchy. Victoria, Princess Royal, known simply as Vicky, arrived in February 1840 as the firstborn child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. From the beginning, her parents believed she wasn't only their daughter, she was also a symbol of monarchy's future. It may feel unusual to imagine a newborn carrying political expectations, but when your mother is Queen Victoria and your father is an ambitious reformer, your cradle is not just a place to sleep. It is a small throne in training. Vicky learned to speak early and express opinions even earlier. She was curious, thoughtful, and quick to ask questions that made adults smile in surprise. Prince Albert, who valued intellect deeply, adored her. He saw Vicky as the child who might one day put their shared ideas about progress, education, constitutional monarchy, scientific thinking, into real action. Meanwhile, Queen Victoria saw in her a fiery determination that reminded her uncomfortably of herself. Both parents loved her, but they also expected a lot from her tiny shoulders. In the nursery classroom, Vicky outperformed everyone. Latin came easily. French and German followed. She studied history not as a list of kings and queens, but as a lesson in cause and effect. nations rising or falling depending on whether leaders used power wisely. Those ideas stuck. Even when she was just a teenager, she believed that royal families should serve their people, not merely rule over them. One could say she grew up thinking that royal crowns should shine with responsibility, not simply glitter. But here was the first complication. The crown she might have worn was not for her. British law favored her younger brother, Bertie, simply because he was a boy. So Vicky's destiny needed a different stage. Her parents began looking across Europe for a place where she, with all her talent, could be useful, admired, and influential. That place turned out to be Prussia. At 17, Vicky married Prince Frederick William of Prussia. The wedding in London was grand and joyful, but the goodbyes were painful. As she stepped onto the ship that would take her to her new home, Vicky was leaving not just her parents, but also the country whose values she hoped to promote. Her parents' dream was clear. Their brilliant daughter would carry the liberal spirit of Britain into the heart of a future German empire. And at first, Vicky tried with all her energy. She learned German quickly, not just the grammar, but its humor, rhythm, and poetry. She embraced Prussian customs. She listened to people. She encouraged hospitals and schools. She hoped that slow, steady improvements could soften the harsh, militaristic traditions around her. She believed that kindness could change a culture, that power could be gentle and still be strong. Unfortunately, her new world was not waiting eagerly for change. The Prussian court was proud, conservative, and suspicious of outsiders. The powerful Chancellor Otto von Bismarck saw Vicky as a threat, not because she wielded a sword, but because she carried ideas. He mocked her quietly and encouraged others to call her the Englishwoman, as if she were an intruder in her own home. Even family turned into opponents. Vicky's father-in-law, King Wilhelm V, respected her intelligence, but distrusted her attempts to influence political thinking. Her own son, Wilhelm, future Kaiser Wilhelm II, learned from his grandfather and his tutors that Prussia must stand firm, not soften. He would grow up seeing his mother's values as weaknesses rather than strengths. Through the years, letters became Vicky's lifeline. Nearly 8,000 messages passed between her and Queen Victoria. Personal, emotional, sometimes anxious. If we could read them all, we would see a mother and daughter trying to hold each other through paper, connecting across borders and pressures neither fully controlled. As the decades went on, Vicky remained a crown princess, always waiting, always preparing. She and Frederick raised 8 children. Some were affectionate and close to her, others distant and rebellious. The more Vicky pushed for progress, the more resistance hardened around her. The Prussian court believed strength came from the army. Vicky believed strength came from wisdom. It was a quiet war, fought with words rather than weapons. Then, after nearly 30 years of waiting, the moment finally arrived. In March 1888, Frederick became Emperor Frederick III of Germany. Vicky became Empress, but it was already too late. Before his coronation, Frederick had developed throat cancer, an illness that robbed him of his voice and then his life. Vicky, who had spent years preparing to help lead a modern Germany, instead spent those same years nursing her husband and battling hopelessness. He died only 99 days after becoming emperor. Her reign, her chance, ended before it truly began. Their son, Wilhelm, took the throne as Kaiser Wilhelm II, and instead of continuing his parents' dreams, he dismissed them. He disliked Vicky's British influences and clung tightly to Prussia's old ideals of war, empire, and domination. Over the next decades, his decisions would help drag Europe into the terrible conflict we now call World War I, a war where kings, queens, and cousins faced each other from opposite sides of trenches. For Vicky, this was not just political tragedy, it was personal heartbreak. She had hoped her son would lead with compassion. Instead, he treated her with coldness, even cruelty. She was pushed away from power and left to watch a future she feared unfold without her. Her life slowly shrank into letters, books, and memories. She stayed in Germany, but lived far from the court. Queen Victoria remained her emotional anchor until the Queen's own death in January 1901. Vicky was too ill, with the breast cancer she kept hidden from many, to attend the funeral. Only a few months later, in August of that same year, she died quietly at age 60. The world barely noticed. There were no great parades, no triumphant speeches. Her story, so full of potential, ended in quiet rooms rather than gleaming palace halls. Yet the effects of her existence ripple far beyond those rooms. Her children and grandchildren sat on thrones. Her diaries and letters remain important records of royal life. And her son, the same son who ignored her ideals, would lead Germany into a war that reshaped Europe forever. The daughter who had once been groomed to spread peace left behind a legacy that included conflict. Still, it would be a mistake to say she failed. Her influence lived on not in laws, but in ideas, in education reforms that survived, in hospital programs that grew, in the belief that royalty should not merely command, but serve, and in the reminder that even the most powerful families struggle to guide the next generation. Vicky's story is a quiet warning. Brilliance and good intentions are not always enough when history pushes back, but it is also a tribute to a woman who tried, again and again, to make power kinder. Bertie, the black sheep who became king. Edward VII. Albert Edward, called Bertie by his family, entered the world in 1841 as the long-awaited male heir. From the moment he opened his eyes, everyone assumed he would one day be king of the United Kingdom. But if Vicky was the star pupil, Bertie became the frustrating riddle. Where she adored books, he found them dull. Where she sat still, he wriggled. Where she impressed tutors, he disappointed them. Expectations clung to his shoulders like a heavy coat he could not shrug off, and the more people expected from him, the more he seemed to fall short. It wasn't that he lacked intelligence. He simply wasn't shaped for the academic world Prince Albert believed a modern king should master. The prince wanted a son who would follow his own example, thoughtful, studious, moral. Bertie wanted laughter, riding horses, gossip, conversation, and the thrill of breaking rules carefully crafted for him. From early childhood, he carried a label he was never allowed to forget: the problem child. The pressure only grew as the British public followed the growth of the Queen Victoria, 9 children. Newspapers hinted at which child seemed more promising. Whispered judgments about the future king circulated in ballrooms and drawing rooms. Every sigh, every mistake, every bored yawn during lessons became proof to his parents that something was wrong with him. It didn't help that his older sister Vicky excelled at everything he struggled with. Imagine being a child and sensing that your parents are disappointed before you even understand why. Prince Albert tried to shape Bertie's personality as if it were a sculpture that just needed enough chiseling. Tutors drilled him. Routines tightened. Outings were replaced with more instruction. But the harder his father pushed, the more anxious and rebellious the young prince became. He laughed too loudly. He flirted too easily. He lived too freely for the tightly wound palace around him. Then came the moment that changed everything. As a teenager, Bertie attended military training in Ireland, where, in a lapse of judgment no longer unusual for him, he found himself involved with an actress. It was a romantic scandal, the kind young men often stumble into, but for the heir to the throne, mistakes were magnified by 1,000. Word reached Queen Victoria, and worse, reached Prince Albert, who rushed to confront his son. Not long after that confrontation, Prince Albert fell gravely ill and soon died. Queen Victoria, already overwhelmed by grief, looked at Bertie and saw not just a wayward son, but the source of her sorrow. She never said he caused the illness directly, yet her behavior quietly communicated blame. Bertie internalized that guilt, perhaps permanently. The house plunged into mourning, and the young heir became a silent symbol of regret, publicly honored, privately distrusted. Victoria withdrew emotionally from the world and from her son. The monarchy kept functioning, but only through letters and advisors. Through those long years, Bertie had no meaningful role. He couldn't make decisions. He couldn't lead anything. He wasn't allowed to be the king in preparation. And yet he already lived with a king-sized burden. The result was predictable. If responsibility would not be entrusted to him, he would pour his energy into pleasure. He became famous for it. Parties, travel, fashion, gambling, cigars. The future Edward VII embraced society in a way his mother never could. He befriended actors, writers, wealthy Americans, French aristocrats. He became the royalty people wanted to see. Charming, approachable, full of charisma. But behind the easy laughter was a man who knew that the one person whose approval he craved most would never give it freely. His marriage in 1863 to Princess Alexandra of Denmark brought stability on the surface. Alexandra was beautiful, kind, and devoted. They had children, 5 who survived, and a partnership that the public admired. But Bertie's long habit of seeking escape continued, and Alexandra tolerated more than most spouses would. She accepted palace life, the mistresses, the gossip, the strain. She believed in the institution and in her husband's good intentions, even when those intentions wandered. Decades passed with Bertie in waiting. Queen Victoria remained on the throne for 63 years, one of the longest reigns in history. During her widowhood, she reluctantly allowed Bertie to take on a few ceremonial duties, mainly because the public adored him. He represented Britain abroad, shaking hands and smoothing tensions where politics alone might fail. The charm that once seemed irresponsible suddenly looked useful. He began to understand something his sister Vicky had always tried to teach. Influence often comes not from lectures or laws, but from connection. Then, in 1901, the long wait ended. Bertie became King Edward VII at nearly 60 years old, and almost immediately, people saw a change. The Playboy Prince became a confident monarch. He met world leaders not as a student, but as an equal. He helped build stronger friendship between Britain and France, easing generations of distrust. That shift, called the Entente Cordiale, quietly reshaped European geopolitics. For all those years he was sidelined, he had been learning something valuable: how to read people. Where Queen Victoria inspired loyalty through solemn duty, Edward VII used warmth and personality. Both styles had power. His simply arrived at a better moment in history. His reign was not long, only 9 years, but the Edwardian era glowed brightly. Technology advanced rapidly, society shifted, fashion and art flourished. The world felt modern and full of promise. Yet beneath the glitter lay tensions, alliances tightening, armies growing, thrones connected by family but divided by ambition. Edward smoked heavily. By 1910, illness caught up with him. He died at 68. The nation mourned not because he had changed laws or led armies, but because he had made people feel seen and valued. In his transformation from black sheep to king, he proved something quietly revolutionary for monarchy. Being liked matters. And perhaps the most striking part of his journey is the lesson hidden within his imperfections. The boy who couldn't sit still eventually learned how to hold a room. The young man who disappointed his parents eventually became the leader his country needed. The heir who felt trapped in others' expectations eventually defined a new kind of royal strength. If Bertie's story teaches anything, it is that destiny is rarely linear. Even a future king can spend most of his life searching for the right way to be himself. Alice. The heart that tried to heal a continent. If every family has a beating heart, the gentle voice that soothes arguments and notices quiet sorrows, Princess Alice was that presence in the Queen Victoria 9 children. Born in 1843, she arrived third in line after Vicky and Bertie, and while she inherited her father's intelligence and her mother's determination, she possessed something that was rarer in royal court: a natural gift for compassion. From the time she could walk, Alice gravitated toward anyone who seemed unhappy or unwell. Nannies recalled her tiny hand slipping into another child's when tears appeared. She sat beside sick pets, calming them with whispers. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, she often eased tension rather than creating it. In a palace built on ritual and duty, she brought warmth. When Prince Albert died, Alice was only 18, but grief made her suddenly older. While others froze under the weight of loss, she moved. She stayed beside her father's bed in his final moments, offering comfort no one had taught her to give. After his death, while Queen Victoria disappeared into mourning, Alice quietly took responsibility, handling correspondence, assisting her mother with palace tasks, supporting her younger siblings. A girl who should have been protected became instead the one offering protection. Victoria relied heavily on her, too heavily. Alice became both daughter and caretaker to a queen who was grieving not just a husband, but the life she believed she deserved. The palace grew darker, curtains drawn, black dresses endless, silence heavy. But Alice refused to let sadness swallow her. She found meaning in action. In 1862, at 19, she married Prince Louis of Hesse and moved to the smaller German state of Darmstadt. Far from London's stiff traditions, she poured herself into work that made sense to her: nursing, midwifery, and public health. She studied Florence Nightingale's methods, visited wounded soldiers, established hospitals and training programs. For a royal woman to step into that world, touching the sick, learning about infection, was shocking. Queen Victoria did not approve. The Queen saw nursing as inappropriate, even unsanitary. It was one thing for royals to give money to hospitals. It was another to roll up one's sleeves and assist in them. She once insulted Alice's maternal instincts by naming a dairy cow Alice, furious that her daughter breastfed her own babies. Royal children, Victoria insisted, should be fed by nurses. Anything else was vulgar. Alice ignored the criticism. Some beliefs are too deeply rooted in kindness to be shaken by old rules. Her home in Darmstadt became known as a place where comfort could be found. Not fancy comfort, human comfort. Family dinners instead of formal feasts. Simple clothing instead of heavy jewels. She laughed easily and encouraged others to speak freely. She believed love, not rank, made a family strong. But life did not reward this goodness with gentleness. One of her sons, little Friedrich, called Fritti, showed early signs of a royal disease the world would later learn to call hemophilia. A small cut could bleed dangerously. A bruise could become deadly inside the body. One day, while playing, he fell and hit his head. No amount of help could save him. Alice held him as he slipped away, powerless against the genetic legacy that had come, silently, invisibly, from Queen Victoria herself. Her heart broke, but it kept working. She continued her public health missions. She helped during the Austro-Prussian War, comforting wounded soldiers and pushing for better hygiene on the front lines. Yet back home in Britain, her own mother remained dismissive, unable to understand why a princess would waste her time with bandages and hospital wards. Alice didn't argue. She acted. As the years passed, Alice gave birth to 7 children, among them daughters who would later shape history. Princess Victoria, who became grandmother to Prince Philip, linking British royalty to Hesse once again. And young Alex, her beloved daughter, who would become the last Empress of Russia, wife of Tsar Nicholas II. Through that marriage, hemophilia traveled from Queen Victoria's descendants into the Russian imperial line. Because of that single mutation, the royal disease, Rasputin entered the Romanov palace. Because of that disease, a desperate mother welcomed a mystic who claimed to save her son. And because of that relationship, whispers of corruption and manipulation spread, contributing to the collapse of the Romanov dynasty during the Russian Revolution. History sometimes pivots not on armies or parliaments, but on a child's fragile veins. But Alice never lived to see that wider tragedy. Her own life held enough. In 1878, diphtheria swept through the Darmstadt palace. One by one, her children became ill. The air thickened with fear, and doctors warned her to keep her distance. But Alice had never been able to step back from suffering. She nursed them herself, refusing the mask of royal separation. When her little daughter Marie died from the disease, Alice's grief was so sharp it made her physically weak. Yet she kept going, caring for the others, until the illness reached her too. She died that same year, at only 35. Her family's sorrow was immense. Even Queen Victoria, so often disapproving, recognized that something irreplaceable had been lost. "She was my dear child," the Queen wrote, "my loving one." But the acknowledgement came too late. Alice had spent her life offering comfort while receiving too little herself. Still, her impact continued in places she never walked. Hospitals she helped establish improved medical care across Germany. Her ideas influenced early nursing programs, and her descendants carried forward both her empathy and her genetic curse. It is tempting to see Alice only as tragic, to say that her kindness cost her dearly, that the royal disease destroyed more than one generation. But that is not the full story. Her life was a bold correction to the idea that royalty must remain distant. She transformed the meaning of being a princess from something glittering and untouchable to something that could kneel beside a sickbed with steady hands. Among Queen Victoria children, she was the clearest reminder that power is not only crowns and armies. Sometimes power is the courage to hold another's hand in their darkest hour. Next, we move to a different kind of journey, one filled with oceans, foreign ports, royal diplomacy, and a prince who seemed happiest when he wasn't on land at all. Alfred, the sailor prince between seas and thrones. Among Queen Victoria, 9 children, Prince Alfred stands out as the one who gazed outward, from palace walls toward the wide world beyond. Born in 1844, he arrived as the 4th child and 2nd son, and from boyhood, he was drawn to maps, ships, and instruments rather than court gossip or political intrigue. While many princes were raised to command armies, Alfred dreamed instead of oceans. His father, Prince Albert, admired discipline and education. His mother valued duty and obedience. The Navy, they thought, could offer both. So at just 14, Alfred became a midshipman in the Royal Navy. Imagine the contrast. A boy raised among velvet drapes and polished floors, suddenly living in a narrow berth on board a ship, learning ropes, braving storms, sharing space with sailors who spoke freely and lived roughly. It was exactly what he wanted. He discovered something essential out there, not just a career, but a sense of identity. At sea, he was not His Royal Highness. He was simply Alfred, expected to work, climb rigging, measure coordinates, and endure cold nights on deck like everyone else. The salty wind was a kind of freedom no crown could give. He became known as the Sailor Prince long before any title of Duke or Admiral was attached to his name. His voyages carried him through Empire's farthest edges: Cape Town, Sydney, Caribbean harbors. He hunted whales in the South Pacific, studied marine life, and collected scientific specimens. He saw colonial power up close, its reach, its pride, its resentments simmering beneath uniforms and flags. One of those resentments nearly killed him. In 1868, while visiting Australia, he attended a picnic at Clontarf near Sydney. The crowd was cheerful, people eager to see a real prince in their distant colony. Then, without warning, a man stepped forward and fired a gun at him. Alfred collapsed, bleeding. Panic erupted as people tackled the shooter, an Irish nationalist who blamed Britain for his people's suffering. It was a moment that revealed the vulnerability of royalty outside palace walls. The Sailor Prince survived the bullet, but he never forgot the reality of empire. Loyalty in one corner of the world, anger in another. He returned to his duties determined, not shaken. Promotions came not as favors, but as results. He earned respect through his skills and steady leadership. By his 30s, he was a renowned naval officer. He had seen more of the ocean than most admirals twice his age. And yet, as he grew older, marriage became another form of diplomacy he could not avoid. His mother had always treated marriage like a game of chess, a way to secure alliances, balance power, and extend British influence quietly through family ties. For Alfred, this meant the Russian Empire. He married Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna, daughter of Tsar Alexander II. She arrived in Britain with the confidence of someone raised in one of Europe's most conservative and autocratic courts. The match brought Britain closer to Russia at a time when rivalry and suspicion often pushed the nations apart. But inside their marriage, cultures clashed. Maria carried the pride of a Romanov princess. She insisted on honors and precedents that made British royals bristle. She missed Russia's grandeur and found British restraint cold and confining. And Alfred, never one for court politics, sometimes withdrew into the familiar rhythm of naval life rather than engage in family disputes. Their home, however, became a hub of European connections. Their daughters would go on to shape royal lines far beyond Britain. Marie became Queen of Romania, known for charisma and leadership during war and political upheaval. Other daughters married into German nobility, tying yet more threads into the tangled web of European dynasties. While these dynastic links grew, Alfred's personal life took a dramatic turn. In 1893, he unexpectedly inherited the title Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha from his uncle, a German, duchy once held by Prince Albert's family. The moment he accepted the role, his naval career ended. The sailor prince became a landlocked duke. It was like asking a fish to rule the forest. He moved to Germany, away from the seas he loved. Gone were the waves, the star-filled night watches, the camaraderie of sailors. His new duties involved budgets, ceremonies, and endless court protocols. For a man whose joy was found in exploration, these routines weighed heavily. Family burdens also deepened. His only son, also named Alfred, struggled. Expectations crushed him. Gossip suggested he fell into melancholy and drinking. In 1899, while still a young man, he took his own life, or possibly died from a self-inflicted gunshot that the family softened into euphemism. The tragedy devastated his parents and cast a long shadow over the duchy. Alfred's own health declined rapidly afterward. Throat cancer tightened around his voice, just as it would later take the life of his brother-in-law, Frederick III, in Germany. On July 30th, 1900, Alfred died at age 55. Not in a heroic naval battle, not during an adventurous journey, but quietly, worn down by illness, grief, and the heavy anchor of responsibility he never sought. What he left behind, though, was not small. Through his children and grandchildren, Queen Victoria descendants extended into Balkan courts, Romanian politics, and German houses that influenced the path to World War I. His daughter Marie played a major role in Romanian history. Another daughter became connected to German rulers whose decisions shaped the coming century. His story is a reminder that even the quieter royals, those who are not kings or emperors, can become hidden levers in Europe's machinery. Alfred never ruled a major empire. He never designed political alliances from a throne. Yet his marriage and family would influence the very crises that redrew maps and toppled monarchies. But beyond geopolitics and naval records, Alfred's life offers something purely human: the struggle to hold on to one's passions while fulfilling duties carved by ancestry. He loved the sea, and duty took him away from it. He wanted adventure, and responsibility led him to courtrooms and councils. He found peace only on the waves, yet spent his final years surrounded by land. Among Queen Victoria children, he may not be the most famous or scandalous, but he might be the most relatable. A person who knew exactly where his soul belonged and spent much of his life pulled somewhere else. If you're ready, we'll now turn to Princess Helena, the quiet force who kept the monarchy functioning during its darkest emotional years. Helena, the quiet backbone of a mourning court. In every great family, there is often one person who keeps the gears turning while others receive the spotlight. For the Queen Victoria 9 children, Princess Helena was that steady, unseen force. Born in 1846 as the 5th child and 3rd daughter, she arrived right in the middle of the royal lineup. And perhaps because of it, she learned early how to support more than shine. Where Vicky debated politics and Bertie broke expectations, Helena observed and protected the fragile balance in the household. She didn't possess Louise's rebellious flair or Alice's intellectual drive, but she had something the monarchy needed just as desperately: reliability. Helena was the one who showed up every day, who eased tension quietly, who understood that taking care of a queen and a nation sometimes means stepping into roles that earn few headlines and little applause. As a child, she was quick with laughter and had a naturally affectionate spirit. Yet her upbringing, shaped by Prince Albert's discipline and Queen Victoria's strict emotional order, expected her warmth to be channeled into usefulness. Like her siblings, She learned languages, music, and etiquette. But where others excelled in specific areas, Helena excelled in helping others excel. Then came the breaking point in the family, Prince Albert's death in 1861. The royal household plunged into a mourning so deep it became its own way of life. Queen Victoria retreated into grief, relying heavily on the daughters who could stay physically and emotionally close. Alice had moved to Hesse, and Vicky was in Prussia. Louise would soon pursue her independent path. That left Helena to become the emotional and administrative anchor within the palace. It was not a glamorous job. It involved keeping correspondence organized, calming the Queen's anxieties, and maintaining royal duties that could not stop simply because the sovereign could not face the public. Helena wrote letters, attended meetings, and acted as Victoria's voice at times when the Queen hid from the world. When the court staff struggled to interpret Victoria's wishes, Helena stepped in. And she did it all without expectation of praise. Queen Victoria trusted Helena deeply, perhaps more than she ever admitted, but with that trust came control. Marriage was a moment every royal child eventually faced, but Helena's future was carefully managed by the Queen. Victoria could not bear too many daughters leaving the nest, especially those she relied on most. So Helena's marriage had a clear condition: she must stay in England. The chosen partner was Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein, a thoughtful, decent man, but from a minor German house without great political influence. The wedding in 1866 secured Helena's continued presence near her mother. It was a compromise between love and necessity, a union that brought Helena companionship and also ensured that Queen Victoria would never lose one of her most loyal supports. Their marriage proved kind and enduring. Helena and Christian built a family with 6 children, 4 of whom survived to adulthood. Their home became an extension of Helena's personality, warm, grounded, filled with quiet devotion rather than pomp. Unlike some royal marriages held together only for appearances, theirs seemed genuinely affectionate. 2 people who appreciated stability and steady purpose. At the same time, Helena developed a passion that gave her life broader meaning: nursing and charitable work. She supported the newly formed British Red Cross and became a champion of the rights and training of nurses. She promoted women's education in healthcare long before such causes were fashionable. While her activism operated far from the dramatic headlines that followed her siblings, it had real and lasting impact. Picture her at a meeting of the British Nurses Association, speaking gently but firmly about the need for professional standards, for better working conditions, for respect toward caregivers who carried society's burdens. She wasn't a revolutionary, but she was a reformer, a quiet one, the most underestimated kind. And yet, the world didn't always celebrate her. Because she lacked scandal, critics called her dull. Because she didn't pursue fame, they ignored her accomplishments. She didn't command armies, reshape foreign policy, or influence emperors. But she strengthened civil society. And that work, though subtle, lasts longer than parades or political speeches. Helena's role beside her mother continued even as the Queen's old age brought new challenges. Victoria depended on her, emotionally, practically, publicly. Helena helped shape the monarchy that survived the Queen's withdrawal from the world after Albert's death. Without Helena's constant effort behind closed doors, many royal obligations would have crumbled. She outlived both Alice and Leopold, lived through the deaths of siblings and children, and watched the Victorian and Edwardian worlds transform. She also lived to see her own work validated, hospitals expanding, nursing recognized as a respected profession, and women growing slowly but visibly in influence and education. She died in 1923 at age 77. Her life did not end with grand spectacle. There were no great upheavals or thrilling scandals to mark her passing. Instead, she left behind quiet strength, the strength that keeps families together and institutions functioning when grief threatens to tear them apart. If Alice was the heart, Helena was the spine. She held everything upright. Her legacy whispers, rather than shouts. Some heroes are not the ones who change history in loud, dramatic moments. Some are the ones who ensure history does not fall apart during silence. Louise, the artist, the feminist, and the sealed files. Princess Louise entered the world in 1848 as the sixth of Queen Victoria, 9 children. But from the very start, she seemed determined not to be boxed in by rank, tradition, or anyone's expectations, especially her mother's. Where her sisters were taught to embody duty and modesty, Louise embraced curiosity and independence. She saw the world not as a stage to play a royal role, but as a canvas waiting for her hands. Her artistic talent surfaced early and loudly. While other princesses politely practiced needlework, Louise sketched bold portraits and sculpted clay figures with fierce concentration. She absorbed music, design, architecture, anything that allowed creation rather than mere consumption. Prince Albert encouraged all his children to appreciate the arts, but Louise's passion exceeded hobby. She wanted mastery. After Albert's death, the palace descended into years of heavy mourning. Black fabric draped every room. Joy became inappropriate. The air felt too still for a girl full of life and imagination. Louise began to feel trapped, a creative soul suffocating under grief she had not chosen. She needed air. She needed color. So she rebelled in the most Louise way possible. She pursued a professional education in art. She became the first British princess to attend a public art school, not a private tutor, not a palace-approved instructor, but a real school with ordinary students who painted and sculpted because it was their livelihood, not their pastime. It was more than a break in protocol. It was a challenge to everything Victorian society believed about royal women. There, she worked from live models. She discussed anatomy and sculptural form. She learned criticism and technique. Newspapers whispered. Courtiers gasped. Queen Victoria worried constantly, both proud of her daughter's talent and terrified of impropriety. But Louise kept going. Her sculptures found public display. One of them, a grand statue of Queen Victoria herself, stands with regal confidence. Louise immortalizing the same mother who often tried to limit her. It was as if, through art, she negotiated a relationship the monarchy alone could not balance. Louise didn't stop challenging norms there. She befriended radicals of her time, writers, actors, feminists, thinkers who challenged the stiff moral code of the Victorian world. She openly supported women's rights, especially increased access to education and public life. She saw no reason royal women shouldn't contribute meaningfully to society, and she refused to accept that bloodlines determined a woman's purpose. Her personality was bright and quick, witty at dinners, sharp in debates. She could charm or cut with equal skill. Some loved her boldness, others found it dangerous. And then came the whispers. Louise had admirers, many admirers, handsome young artists, court officials, possibly a private romance or two, and possibly something more. There are rumors, never confirmed but never extinguished, of a child born in secret, quietly adopted, surname altered, papers sealed, files concerning Louise's life, kept deep within royal archives, remain locked to this day. Historians try to read between lines, follow clues, but walls of silence remain. Whether or not the rumors are true, they reveal something essential. Louise lived a life close enough to ordinary, human desire that secrecy became necessary armor. Marriage eventually arrived, but on her own terms. She married John Campbell, the Marquess of Lorne, an aristocrat but not royal by birth. It was a groundbreaking union, a princess marrying a man without a crown. Louise liked that. She wasn't marrying for politics. She was marrying for compatibility, ambition, and freedom. Their partnership was equal in a way most royal marriages weren't, but equality can also expose differences. John Campbell was cerebral, introverted, deeply political. Louise was energetic and social. Their temperaments collided often, and there were challenges only hinted at in letters, illnesses, possible estrangement, separate living arrangements. Yet they maintained mutual respect longer than many more traditional royal couples did. For several years, they lived in Canada, where John served as Governor General. Louise embraced the adventure fully. She walked city streets, made friends with artists, attended exhibitions and theater shows. She left a mark that endures. Lake Louise and Alberta are named in her honor. Canadians admired her, not just as a royal visitor, but as a woman who took interest in their culture and their future. Back in Britain, after their return, her role evolved. She became a patron of art schools, supported emerging sculptors, and continued advocating for female education. During Queen Victoria's later years, Louise played a delicate but influential role, managing court responsibilities, smoothing public appearances, and helping a monarchy still shadowed by mourning transition gradually toward a more modern era. She lived long enough to witness profound transformations. The Victorian age gave way to the Edwardian era. The Edwardian era fell into the catastrophe of World War I. Monarchies crumbled across Europe. Industrial inventions reshaped daily life. Fashion, politics, and society reinvented themselves constantly. Louise remained, sometimes in the background, sometimes stepping forward when needed. She outlived most of her siblings, dying in 1939 at 91. Think of that timeline, the year 1939. Bombs would soon fall over cities. The world was on the edge of a second devastating war. Yet here was Louise, a living link to a century that felt distant even then. An era of queens wearing crowns of diamonds, soldiers riding into battle on horseback, and royal daughters whose futures were planned before they took their first steps. Her life feels like a keyhole into the entire Victorian century. Through her, you glimpse its rules and its rebellions, its beauty and its secrets. She was a princess who refused to behave as one should, an artist forced to sculpt her identity while court expectations pressed against her every move. A woman whose most honest self might still be hidden in protected archives. Among the Queen Victoria children, she is the mystery that refuses to end. Now we turn to a different story, one not shaped by creativity or caregiving, but by discipline, loyalty, and the long shadow of the British Empire. He served a crown that kept demanding more, and he kept answering. Arthur, the Soldier Prince and the Long Shadow of Empire. Prince Arthur arrived in 1850, the seventh of Queen Victoria's 9 children, and almost immediately he seemed to embody everything his parents hoped a royal son could be. Calm where Bertie was restless, steady where Alfred was playful, quietly ambitious without ever challenging the boundaries of duty. Queen Victoria once confided that Arthur was dearer than any of the others put together, a statement that would have stung his siblings, had they not already suspected he was her favorite. Arthur adored Prince Albert and absorbed his father's ideals almost like scripture: discipline, punctuality, moral strength, and honorable service. From the moment he could toddle, He wanted uniforms, tiny military jackets, polished boots, miniature swords. He marched around nurseries as if commanding invisible battalions. When he turned 16, he received the gift he had longed for, a commission in the British Army. Where his siblings searched for identity, Arthur found his. He served. The Empire welcomed him with open arms. In an age where Britain stretched across seas and continents, soldiers were symbols of stability, reassurance, and power. Arthur became that symbol. He learned strategy. He learned languages. He learned to endure heat, illness, and loneliness. He rode horses across South African velds. He inspected regiments in India. He watched the British flag flutter over distant lands that rarely saw London, but always felt its rule. The more he served, the more he seemed built for it. He lacked Bertie's dramatic scandals, Louise's rebellious streak, or Leopold's tragic fragility. His life rarely made headlines, yet every duty he performed helped keep the machinery of empire running smoothly. That reliability made him invaluable. Like many of Victoria's children, Arthur's marriage carried political implications. In 1879, he wed Princess Louise Margaret of Prussia, strengthening yet another tie between Britain and Germany. Queen Victoria approved. The match was proper, respectable, and welcomed by European courts. The couple genuinely liked each other, and while their affection was quieter than fairy tale romance, it endured. They welcomed 2 daughters and a son. One daughter, Margaret, would marry into the Swedish royal family, another branch of Victoria's bloodline reaching into yet another throne. But Arthur always returned to the army. His life was measured not in palaces, but in postings. He commanded troops in Ireland during difficult political unrest. He served in Egypt as Britain's control over the Suez Canal expanded. He became an authority not only on battle, but on the governance that followed conquest, how to manage loyalty, when to apply force, and when restraint would serve the crown better. 1911, a new assignment pulled Arthur far from Europe, Governor-General of Canada. For a man who spent decades enforcing imperial rule, here was a role requiring diplomacy, dignity, and listening. Canada was no longer a frontier outpost. It was a growing nation with its own pride, politics, and voice. Arthur embraced the opportunity. He traveled widely, met indigenous leaders, visited farmers and city workers alike. Canada respected him. He treated the country not as a colony, but as a partner. Then, the world changed. In 1914, World War I erupted, an explosion sparked in part by the tangled royal alliances Queen Victoria had spent decades constructing. Cousins became enemies. Empires shook. The very system Arthur had dedicated his life to protecting was beginning to fracture. As Governor-General, Arthur helped lead Canada's early war efforts. Soldiers marched under his review. Families sent sons across oceans. Canada would bleed for a war caused largely by European dynastic rivalries, the same dynasties Arthur belonged to. Canada's growing independence became impossible to ignore. The empire that had given Arthur rank and purpose was evolving. Colonies were becoming nations. The sun had not yet set on the British Empire, but dusk had begun. After his Canadian term ended in 1916, Arthur returned home as an elder statesman. He remained in uniform, always the soldier prince, even when his duties became mostly ceremonial. In photographs from the 1930s, you see a man in his 80s, medals across his chest, posture straight as a parade ground line. Tenacity was his quiet language. His siblings faded one by one. Alfred gone, Leopold gone, Helena gone, Louise gone. Each loss a reminder that the world he understood was slipping away. He had entered life in the age of steam engines and swords. Now he lived in the age of radios and tanks, airplanes, and mass democracy. Monarchies fell across Europe, Germany, Russia, Spain, some toppled in part by the ripple effects of Victoria's dynasty. Arthur survived both world wars, witnessing the unimaginable: trenches, poison gas, aerial bombings, concentration camps, and nuclear dread. He lived long enough to see the British Empire begin its transformation into a commonwealth, no longer ruled but united by choice. A shift monumental enough to make even the most loyal soldier question what empire had ever truly meant. In his final years, Arthur remained dignified. He attended ceremonies, he visited regiments, he saluted young soldiers who fought wars infinitely crueler than the conflicts of his youth. They saw in him a walking relic, living proof that history was not just pages in books, but flesh and memory. Arthur passed away in 1942 at age 91, only 2 years before his youngest sister Beatrice. Between his first breath and last, he witnessed nearly a century of upheaval. When he was born, Queen Victoria had not yet taken the throne. When he died, Winston Churchill led Britain through the darkest days of World War II. One man's lifetime bridged the height of Victorian confidence and the near collapse of the old world order. Arthur's legacy is subtle but strong. He didn't scandalize. He didn't innovate. He didn't break boundaries. Instead, he carried the heavy, often invisible weight of monarchy, representing ideals, showing up, enduring when endurance alone felt like victory. Among Queen Victoria, 9 children, he may have been the least complicated. But that simplicity hid profound resilience. Next comes a story far more fragile. A story where blood itself becomes a threat, and a brilliant young prince wrestles with a body that refuses to obey the crown. Leopold, the fragile genius and the royal disease. Prince Leopold arrived in 1853, Queen Victoria's 8th child, and for a brief moment he seemed like a blessing untouched by the sorrows that often hovered over royal nurseries. He was bright-eyed, quick to smile, alert to every new thing. Victoria adored him instantly. Here, at last, was a son whose gentleness felt like Prince Albert's, not the troublesome temperament of Bertie. But the royal doctors soon noticed something troubling. Bruises lingered. Small bumps led to alarming swelling. Bleeding took too long to stop. The truth emerged quietly and ominously. Leopold suffered from hemophilia, a rare hereditary disorder that prevents blood from clotting properly. In the Victorian era, it was effectively a death sentence. The Queen was devastated and afraid. A mother who demanded strength in her sons now had one who might die from a stumble. From that moment, Leopold's childhood was wrapped in soft caution. He was kept away from roughhousing, climbing, running too quickly, even sitting on hard toys. Nurses hovered, hands ready to catch him before gravity did. Play was allowed, but only with rules, and rules within rules. Many children rebel when controlled. Leopold did the opposite. He looked inward, and his mind bloomed. Denied the freedom to test his body, he exercised his intellect. He read widely. He played piano. He studied mathematics, art, and puzzles with profound focus. His tutors marveled. This fragile prince was perhaps the most intelligent of Queen Victoria's 9 children. But the love that protected him also smothered him. Queen Victoria was terrified of losing him and watched his every movement like a hawk, fearful of wind. He later wrote that he longed for a little danger, the thrill of being able to risk something, anything. When Leopold reached young adulthood, he insisted on attending university. Victoria resisted. Oxford, she feared, would be filled with sharp corners and careless youth. But Leopold pleaded, reasoning that a life protected to the point of paralysis was no life at all. His doctors agreed that learning and independence would benefit his health more than cotton-wrapped living. He went, and he flourished. At Oxford, Leopold tasted the one gift hemophilia had nearly stolen from him, a normal existence. He made friends outside royal circles, clever young men who valued discussion over deference. He walked through courtyards without a nurse pacing behind. He debated politics, art, life. He discovered he loved thinking not because it was safe, but because it made him feel alive. His friendships were exceptional. Lewis Carroll, yes, the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, admired his mind. John Ruskin believed he possessed artistic sensitivity. Oscar Wilde reportedly enjoyed conversations with him about imagination and morality. To great thinkers, Leopold wasn't a prince, he was a peer. Queen Victoria noticed. She brought him back into her orbit and began giving him responsibilities, drafting correspondence, supporting her public work. She trusted his judgment even more than Bertie's. He became the quiet counselor she relied on when fear clouded her decisions. And fear clouded her decisions often. Yet he remained lonely. His siblings married, moved, started families. Leopold longed for love, but who would risk marrying a man whose body might fail him before he reached old age? Victoria hesitated too. Losing a son to marriage felt a step closer to losing him entirely. At last, love prevailed. In 1882, Leopold married Princess Helena of Waldeck-Pyrmont, a thoughtful woman who accepted him fully, hemophilia and all. Their wedding photos show a prince beaming with fragile hope, leaning on a cane but standing tall. Happiness finally seemed within reach. Leopold and Helena welcomed a daughter, sweet Princess Alice, named for his sister who embodied compassion in their family. And Helena soon became pregnant again. Leopold looked to the future with something he had rarely allowed himself: optimism. In early 1884, they traveled to Cannes, France. Doctors recommended warmer climates to soothe his aching joints. Hemophilia caused internal bleeding that could make simple movements agonizing. Sunshine helped, but one evening, while moving through a room, perhaps from a small misstep or a slip, Leopold fell. A normal man would have stood, brushed off the discomfort, and laughed at the clumsiness. Leopold could not. Bleeding began inside his skull, slow, hidden, deadly. Over several days, swelling increased. There were no modern surgeries or emergency transfusions, nothing anyone could do. Queen Victoria received a telegram. Her darling boy was dying. She was too late. Leopold passed away on March 28, 1884, just 30 years old. A brilliant mind silenced by a flaw in the blood of the most powerful family in Britain. His newborn son, Charles Edward, came into the world too late to meet him. Leopold's death broke something inside Victoria, a confirmation of her worst fear. She could not protect her children from fate, no matter how tightly she controlled them. She wrote that the pain was harder to bear than words can express. One more child gone. One more ache that mourning couldn't soothe. But Leopold's story doesn't end with his last breath. Hemophilia, carried silently by Queen Victoria, continued its deadly path through her descendants. It traveled to Russia through Alice's daughter Alexandra, affecting the young Tsarevich Alexei, whose illness drove the royal family into the arms of mystics like Rasputin, unsettling an already unstable nation. It traveled to Spain through Beatrice's daughter, Victoria Eugenie, crippling Spanish princes and political trust in the monarchy. One genetic mutation in one queen reshaped thrones, fueled revolutions, and sunk dynasties. Leopold was the first clear warning, and no one knew how to stop what was coming. His children carried his legacy in different directions. His daughter Alice, living long enough to see television, jet travel, and the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. His son Charles Edward inherited a German duchy from Alfred, and, in a cruel historical twist, became politically entangled with the Nazi regime. Leopold's life raises a quiet but haunting truth. Power offers no immunity from fragility. Even the most privileged bloodline can carry within it the seed of downfall. He lived with dignity. He yearned for freedom. He loved bravely despite a body that betrayed him. And though he left early, he shaped history simply by being born. Now, only one child remains, the youngest, the one Queen Victoria refused to release, the one who kept her secrets with ink and fire, the daughter who lived the longest, and yet the least free. Beatrice, the last child, the keeper of secrets. Princess Beatrice was born in 1857, the ninth and final child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. She arrived when the royal household already overflowed with tutors, governesses, lessons, rules, and siblings. Yet, Victoria reacted to her newborn baby as though she were a precious miracle. She was tiny, fair, sweet-tempered, and perfectly timed. Just 3 years later, Prince Albert died. The Queen retreated into a world of perpetual black, rigid, silent, grief-filled. And in that darkness, Beatrice became the one small light Victoria clung to. Other children grew into roles: the scholar, the heir, the nurse, the sailor, the artist, the soldier, the thinker. But Beatrice? She was simply there, always, every day, every hour. Unknowingly, she became her mother's emotional lifeline. Queen Victoria called her baby long after childhood faded. She forbade anyone to speak of Beatrice marrying. Suitors were discouraged before they dared feel hope. Beatrice learned early that love, romantic love, was not meant for her. Duty replaced freedom. She copied Victoria's letters, read documents at her side, attended every event at her elbow. She helped dress the Queen, ate when the Queen ate, sat when the Queen sat. Beatrice lived not her own life, but Victoria's. Her siblings teased her, never cruelly, but with a note of realism. "You will stay at home forever." Beatrice agreed, not because she truly wished to, but because she saw no other path she was allowed to take. But life, even in a gilded cage, can surprise us. In 1884, Beatrice attended the wedding of her niece, who had married into the Battenberg family, a noble German house without a ruling throne. There, she met Prince Henry of Battenberg. He was charming, athletic, warm-hearted, and he noticed her, really noticed her. For the first time in life, Beatrice felt seen as a woman, not as an accessory to the Queen. She fell in love. She gathered the courage to tell her mother. Queen Victoria's reaction was instant and icy. She stopped speaking to Beatrice. Not a word, not a glance. For over 6 months, the Queen communicated with her youngest child only through written notes placed stiffly onto desks or trays, even when they sat in the same room. It was punishment for wanting a life that wasn't solely the Queen's. This silent war might have destroyed another person, but Beatrice endured her mother's coldness quietly, refusing to give up Henry. The Queen eventually surrendered to reality, but on one condition: Beatrice and Henry must continue to live with her, always. Beatrice agreed. Love with chains was better than no love at all. Her wedding day in 1885 was joyful. Even Victoria eventually softened, realizing she liked her new son-in-law's charm. Leo, she called him kindly. The family smiled in photographs, a rare burst of warmth in Victoria's mourning-era portraits. Beatrice later gave birth to 4 children. The sound of children's laughter returned to the Queen's lonely rooms. Perhaps that softened her heart further. But time has a habit of testing happiness. Henry, restless and eager for purpose, joined a British military expedition in West Africa in 1896. Malaria struck swiftly. He died far from home. Beatrice remained alone with her children, and a mother whose need for her had only grown with age. She stayed loyal, always loyal. When Queen Victoria died in 1901, after more than 6 decades on the throne, Beatrice's entire existence shifted. She had been daughter caretaker for 43 years. Who was she now? Who was she allowed to become? Victoria gave her the final task, one that defined her place in history. The Queen kept journals, millions of words documenting her reign, her marriage, her fears, her judgments, her passions. Private thoughts that could shake reputations or alter perceptions of the monarchy forever. Beatrice was tasked with preparing them for posterity. She read every page, every confession, every angry remark about a child, every private grudge, every secret. She edited, rewrote by hand, and burned the originals. One by one, the Queen's handwritten diaries, the rawest evidence of her mind, turned to ash. What survived is the version Beatrice approved. Did she protect her mother's legacy or censor British history? We will never know all that was lost. Historians still debate whether Beatrice acted from love or fear. As she worked, the world changed around her. Her youngest son, Maurice, was killed in France during World War I. Another mother grieving over another son who never grew old. Another son, Leopold, named after Beatrice's fragile brother, inherited hemophilia. The royal disease had passed again through Victoria's blood. He died from complications at just 32. Her daughter Victoria Eugenie, Ina, married the King of Spain, making Beatrice the mother of a queen. Yet the same disease traveled with her, haunting the Spanish royal family and contributing to political instability that toppled their monarchy in 1931. Beatrice had lived her entire life under royal duty, and that duty rippled into other nations' tragedies. She watched monarchies fall, while hers survived partly because she had curated the very narrative that protected its image. By the time she reached her 80s, Beatrice was the last living child of Queen Victoria. Brothers and sisters, Vicky, Bertie, Alice, Alfred, Helena, Louise, Arthur, Leopold, all gone. She alone remembered the sound of Prince Albert's voice, the feel of Queen Victoria's hand guiding hers. When she died in 1944, at 87, bombs fell over London as the world tore itself apart again in war. Modernity had swept away much of the Victorian age. And yet, Beatrice remained part of it until her final breath. The final witness to palace nurseries, arranged marriages, court scandals, hemophilia secrets, and the long rule of the woman who shaped Europe more than she ever intended. Queen Victoria built an empire with iron will, but also built a family of fragile hearts. Beatrice held their stories, protected them, changed them, burned them. Was she the most loyal daughter or the greatest editor of royal truth? Perhaps both. Now, all 9 children have lived their lives, loved, lost, ruled, rebelled, and rested. Only one part remains: how these 9 stories, 9 beating hearts, shaped the world we inherited. Bloodlines, broken thrones, and the price of one woman's choices. 9 cribs in Buckingham Palace, 9 children raised under the weight of a crown, 9 lives that stretched across Europe like threads in a grand design that no one fully controlled. Queen Victoria believed she was forging stability, linking Britain to other royal houses through marriages and blood, a united Europe through family ties, love and diplomacy sewn together into something powerful. But when you stitch empires together with human hearts, the seams rarely hold forever. By the late 19th century, Victoria proudly carried a new title, Grandmother of Europe. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren wore crowns in Germany, Russia, Greece, Romania, and Spain. It looked, from the outside, like success beyond imagination. Yet inside the family, cracks had formed long before the public saw them. Vicky's liberal hopes in Germany were rejected by her own son, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who grew up resentful, emotionally wounded, driven by insecurity and power. He distrusted Britain, belittled his mother's British values, and eventually led Germany down a path toward catastrophic conflict. Alice's compassion brought her into the darkest rooms of illness, and through her blood, hemophilia seeped into the courts of Russia and Spain. Her daughter, Empress Alexandra, clung to Rasputin in desperate fear for her dying heir. That desperation fed rumors, eroded trust, and helped push an empire toward revolution. Alfred's daughters married into European dynasties whose thrones fell apart as wars redrew borders. His line touched Romania's troubled path through early 20th century upheaval. Louise and Helena stayed close to Britain, supporting charities, war hospitals, and the monarchy's shifting role, but always under strict watch, their independence controlled by propriety and expectation. Arthur served empire and duty, then lived long enough to see empire break apart. Leopold's hemophilia shaped not only his own short, brilliant life, but also the fate of future monarchies that depended on strong heirs to survive turbulent times. Beatrice preserved the monarchy's image, editing history itself to protect the crown and her mother's memory, while unknowingly allowing the royal disease to spread further through Europe. And Bertie, once the family's disappointment, eventually demonstrated a diplomacy that temporarily eased European tensions. But after his death, peace unraveled once more, partly because royal cousins stopped speaking as family and started posturing as rivals. These stories, taken together, suggest something uncomfortable. The First World War wasn't only a war between nations, it was a war between relatives. 3 main leaders in 1914 were first cousins: King George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. All grandsons of Queen Victoria's extended circle, all raised to rule, all failed to stop the war that broke the world. They sent millions into battle, but they could not save each other. That is the hidden legacy of Victoria's family strategy, royal unity that ultimately magnified conflict. Blood-bound alliances eventually forced nations into war like dominoes locked in formation. A century of matchmaking exploded into a generation of loss. Meanwhile, the royal disease, hemophilia, continued its quiet destruction. Young princes died, lineages collapsed, monarchies stumbled without secure heirs to stabilize frightened governments. Here is the paradox. Queen Victoria, more than almost any monarch before her, shaped the DNA and political destiny of Europe. But her decisions did not prevent disaster. They helped create the conditions for it. Her iron grip on her children, who they married, where they lived, how they behaved, forged the connections that made Europe look united, until unity became a trap. Her desire for control produced both unity and fracture, both stability and chaos, both glory and grief, Even her descendants who survived faced the weight of expectation and the pain of being symbols instead of free souls. They carried titles, not choices. Their joys and loves were filtered through strategy and fear. Fear of scandal, fear of vulnerability, fear of defect. Victoria loved her children, but she also used them. She believed their lives were tools of empire, instruments of history, and so they became exactly that. Instruments of diplomacy, instruments of genetic legacy, instruments of tragedy. Yet beneath the politics, beneath the crowns and wars and genealogies, these 9 people were simply children who wanted affection, safety, validation. Instead, they were handed scripts. Vicky must reform Germany. Bertie must redeem himself. Alice must care for everyone else. Alfred must serve the sea. Helena must stay. Louise must restrain her fire. Arthur must defend empire. Leopold must not fall. Beatrice must remain her mother's shadow. Not one of them fully escaped the roles assigned at birth, and still, every one of them shaped history in ways they never asked for. Tonight, if you picture them not as royals, but as human beings, the story becomes something different, something more tender and more haunting. One mother, overwhelmed by grief and responsibility, tried to keep her family close by binding them to power. Instead, she sent them into storms they could not survive. So what should we conclude from this long journey? Maybe this: history isn't built only by great speeches or armies marching. It is built inside homes, at dinner tables, in nurseries where children are told who they must be, in letters between mothers and daughters, in alliances made without love, in choices shaped by fear. Queen Victoria shaped Europe not just because she ruled an empire, but because she raised 9 children who carried her influence into every corner of a continent. Tonight, as you rest, imagine those children no longer as princes and princesses, but as sons and daughters, each one doing their best to live up to expectations far greater than themselves. You do not need a crown to understand them. Love, obligation, family pressure, the longing to be seen for who you are, the hope your story will matter. These are not royal emotions, they are human ones. Close your eyes and picture letters traveling across borders, a sailor prince staring out from a ship at a star-lit ocean, an artist princess shaping her mother's face from stone, a soldier prince standing tall as empire unravels behind him, a gentle nurse holding a fevered hand, a fragile scholar dreaming of a longer life, a youngest daughter turning the pages of her mother's secrets. One by one, the 9 children drift out of sight. Their voices fade into memory, their crowns tarnish with time, but their echoes remain all around us. Europe and the modern world still stands in the wake of their joy, their sorrow, their choices, and their silence. History remembers the Queen. Tonight, we remember her children.